I must make 3 honest confessions. Confession number 1, it may be too early to examine the impact of COVID-19 on the Muslim spiritual institutions and practices now, simply because many countries, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is still having shooting cases, and therefore the end of this kind of pandemic is still far from prediction. Secondly, the second confession that I want to make is I have not pegged my presentation on any scholarly work in this area. The reason is I want to rely on my personal observation and experience as a religious scholar and as a practitioner to make my independent position on this kind of a topic. The third confession that I want to make is that the time allocated for this kind of topic might not allow us to exhaust the pros and cons of this area. And this means that, inshallah ta'ala, I shall be limiting my presentation on what has unveiled so far within the limit of 1 hour allocated to this topic. Now, at the beginning, let us first of all look at the impact of COVID-19 on holy religious sites. At international level, the biggest impact of COVID-19 on religious sites such as the sacred mosques of Mecca and Medina and Qudus, mainly it has been on vacation. You are all aware that the images which are reaching us now, they show the Kaaba empty. They show Medina whereby you are having very few numbers, very little number of people. I think it is the same which applies on Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Statistics show that under normal circumstances, the internal part of Al-Haram Al-Makki, it is occupied by around per each hour. What does this mean? When you look at the images which are reaching us now, they indicate how both the Haram of Mecca and the Haram of Medina have been swept up. History confirms there has been 40 times when the Holy Kaaba has been free from worshippers due to reasons that are ranging from political, economic, and social. Some of these instances include, it is reported that the first time that the Holy Kaaba was freed from worshippers, it was in the year 316 AH, which is the year 928 or 929 AD. What happened during this time? It is reported that the Shia sect known as the Qaramitwa, under the leadership of a man known as Abu Tahir, invaded the Holy Mosque and banned the pilgrims from accessing it. What was their reason? They did this under the pretext that visiting the Kaaba is a form of idol worship. And therefore, they banned the people from entering Kaaba. Not only that, but they also made an intention to destroy the black stone. It has been reported that This kind of insurgence ended with the massacre of 30,000 worshippers around the Kaaba. Not only that, but it also ended with the disruption of the Zamzam source of water, which is well known to the believers, and this led to the suspension of Hajj for a period of 10 years. The Shiite Karamita sect, it is also reported that they took away the black stone and they never surrendered it back until after 10 years when they received big quantities of gold. So this is the first time whereby you find the Kaaba being freed from the worshippers. It is also mentioned that around the year 1814, Hajj was suspended due to smallpox, which claimed the lives of around 8,000 people in Mecca and Medina. The third instance was in the year 1883, whereby Hajj was also suspended due to cholera, which claimed many lives. The fourth time took place on the 20th of November, 1979, whereby a man known as Juhayman al-Utaybi stormed the Haram Mosque with the troops that led to the suspension of Umrah during that period, and there was some kind of exchange of fight between these people and the Saudi authorities. So brothers and sisters in Islam, I have just picked these 4 out of the 40 times in the interest of time, just to show you that if the holy sites are free from worshippers this time, it is not new in the history of Islam. Now, this kind of vacation, what kind of impact does it have on the Muslim society or on the Muslim world? Brothers and sisters in Islam, suspension of Hajj and Umrah, it has a big negative impact on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia annual revenues and consequently to the Muslim world. In an article which is entitled, "Why Hijab Will Soon Be the Oil for Saudi Arabia," the annual revenue for hijab industry in Saudi Arabia, it has been estimated to be at 12 billion US dollars per year, next to oil and gas. What does this mean? The fact that oil and gas industry, it is already affected by COVID-19. This puts the kingdom in such a vulnerable situation that may call for the revision of its foreign policy on charity and funding. In another article, which is known as The Economics of Hajj, which was published on 1st July 2018, it was reported that according to the Mecca Chamber of Commerce and Industry, between 25% and 30% of the private sector's income in the region around Mecca and Medina depends on pilgrimage. Such industries include the hotel industry, the restaurants, the travel agents, transport industry, textiles, among others. Now, this means that once you find this kind of impact on Saudi Arabia, then the whole Muslim world is going to be affected. For instance, it has also been mentioned that the Saudi fund, which was set up by a royal decree in October 1974 to stimulate economic growth in developing nations, it has extended big financial support, especially to countries with the lowest per capita income bracket in the world. The Saudi foreign aid, it stretches to many areas of this world, in the Middle East, in Africa, and elsewhere. And of course, all this come with strings attached, such as its need for foreign control and influence. This such cannot be ruled out. Now, there is one of the writers by names of Leo Barassi. In an article, Saudi Arabia's Humanitarian Aid, a Political Takeover, which was published in November 2004. This kind of writer asserted that Saudi Arabia has one of the largest humanitarian aid budgets in the world and delivered through a range of public and private mechanisms. He further asserts that the full scope of the work of Saudi charities is difficult to trace accurately since they do not have a tradition of formally reporting their activities. Now, the conclusion is, if Saudi Arabia has been ranked on top of the funders of Islamic programs the world over and many other projects the world over, then it means that many countries are likely to feel the COVID-19 impact on Saudi Arabia due to its effect on Hijjah and Umrah, as well as on the oil and gas industries of Saudi Arabia. Now, having said that, let us now come to the local setting after having talked about that international area. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on local Muslim institutions? Unlike mosques, which we all know, which depend on foreign funds on their establishment and then the maintenance is left to worshippers, the majority of the charitable organizations that we have, they depend on their establishment depends on foreign funds, but also their day-to-day operations are also dependent on the same. Brothers and sisters in Islam, it is still fresh in our minds of Ugandans and the minds of Ugandan Muslims that several charitable organizations, for instance, Al-Muntada Al-Islami, it closed its business here in Uganda simply because there was an effect on its headquarters in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We pray that the past experience does not storm our Muslim circles. It is also worth to mention that besides the mosques that we have playing their traditional roles of hosting religious practices like Swala and other darasas, many are acting actually as sources of income to their respective administrators. Unlike the rural Muslim administrators who collect their revenues from worshippers on Friday and maybe on Eid days, and they depend their livelihood much on their agricultural produce and other humble resources, it is a well-established fact that many urban mosque administrators have been drawing their daily livelihood from worshippers indirectly or directly through their collections, which range from the Subuhi time up to the Isha time. What does this mean? It is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the provider, who knows how they have survived during the COVID-19 lockdown that involved the closure of mosques, and therefore the reopening is still far, and even the opening is still far from prediction or from imagination. Now, having talked about the institutions, let me now talk about the COVID-19 impact on the spiritual practices. Apart from Hajj and Umrah, COVID-19 has had only a minimal negative impact, with some challenges on other religious practices due to the following intrinsic safeguards and mechanisms. Brothers and sisters in Islam, the nature of Islamic law is in such a way that it has some internal safeguards and mechanisms which can protect this religion from too much effect. For instance, there are some Islamic law provisions for the constant and the changing situations. In other words, in Islam, we have what we call the athawabit and al-mutaghayyirat. In other words, when the situation is ideal, when the situation is normal, there are such applicable rules of Sharia. And if the situation is abnormal or we are in a situation of emergency, Sharia also has other rules which apply in such a situation. So this is one of the guarantees that can protect the spiritual practices from being much affected with such pandemics such as the COVID-19. Number two is that the Islamic divine categorization and arrangement of religious practices. As we are about to see, the way how the religious practices have been arranged in Islam, they are varying from they are having different categorizations. And this kind of categorization have played a very big role in order to safeguard the spiritual practices from the impact of COVID-19, as we are soon going to see. The three is the impact of COVID-19. It is not new in the circles of Islam. We have some precedents in Islamic history which Muslims can rely on in order to see how can they continue with their Islamic practices even during this time of pandemic. Let us now look at the Islamic law provisions for the constant and changing times or situations. COVID-19 has just confirmed the universality of Islam as one of the major distinctive characteristics of Islamic law. And this kind of characteristics gives Islam a leverage to address a socio-economic challenge across all communities and across all times. The Quranic provisions for ease and addressing the state of emergencies and necessities, such as Quran chapter 2, verse 185, that is Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Ma'idah chapter 5, verse 6, and then Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2, verse 173. All this just gave Muslims an opportunity to translate these Islamic provisions into practice during the era of COVID-19. What do I mean? When you look at the provisions of Islam, you will find out that this religion is based on simplicity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah has not created any difficulty in the way how you are practicing your religion. In other verses, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah wants for you ease, He does not want for you difficulty. And many others. فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. If someone is found in such a state of necessity, in such a state of emergency, what the rules of Sharia do in such a situation is that they relax so that a Muslim can pass through such kind of challenge. Therefore, this kind of rules of Islamic law, whereby you have those which apply during the ideal situation and those which apply during the emergency situation, it just made the religious practices immune to COVID-19 negative impact. In fact, Muslim scholars have written extensively on the jurisprudence of emergency and necessity. And therefore, this kind of mechanism has safeguarded the effect of the spiritual practices against the impact of COVID-19. Therefore, Muslims have learned in this time to pray Salat al-Dhuhr on Friday. Yet it is known that under normal circumstances, we are supposed to go out and perform our Jummah prayers. Now, that is the ideal situation. That is the Thawabit side of Islam. During the normal situation, we go for Jummah. During the emergencies like that of COVID-19, then we go for Dhuhr. And that is the way how Islamic law has managed to survive across nations, across times. Now, the issues of social distance in the lining of prayers, etc., all these have come, but they have not had such a big impact on the religious practices because of this kind of alternation from what is constant to what is changing. Now, let us also look at another guarantee or at another safeguard. Islamic law has categorized its religious practices into many categories according to a number of criteria. Now, this kind of divine categorization of religious practices just confirmed that the main objective of creation, which is laid down in Surah Al-Dhariyat, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. It cannot be halted for even a single moment. Our objective or the major purpose of our creation is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made some mechanism in the religion that this kind of objective cannot be halted for even a single moment. Religious practices, brothers and sisters in Islam, are categorized along several criteria. For instance, some of them are individual, others are communal, others are separate, others are public. Some of them are general, others are specific. Some are regular, others are irregular. Some of them require the physical intervention, others just need the financial intervention, others are dual. Some of them are verbal, others are practical. Some of them are daily, others are weekly. We have the monthly, we have the annual, we have the lifetime. What does that mean? If COVID-19, for instance, it has an impact on a weekly Islamic practice, it might not have an impact on what is daily. If it can affect which is regular, it might not affect what is irregular. If it affects what is annual, it might not affect what is monthly. And in this way, the religious practices survive during all times. The implication of this is that this kind of categorization, there is nothing in this world that can totally halt the Islamic spiritual practices. In fact, apart from Hajj and some few optional practices such as visiting the Prophet's grave in Medina, which are also on a lifetime basis. The rest of the religious practices are not tied to a geographical location for their performance. Brothers and sisters, you could see the wisdom in Islam, or the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are those practices which are supposed to be conducted in a certain geographical location like Hajj, because we know that walillahi ala nasi hajjul bayti man istata ilayhi sabila. If a person wants to go and if a person wants to perform Hajj, he must travel to Makkah. That is the way how to do it. But look at the hikmah of Islam. First of all, those kind of practices which require Muslims to be in a particular geographical location, first of all, they are few. Secondly, they are not obligatory except once in a lifetime. This simply means that if COVID-19 can affect that, Muslims have another variety of other practices that they can conduct in different places. What does this mean? It means that a Muslim can therefore freely worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it was guided by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he says that one of the distinctive characteristics which were given to this ummah of Islam is وَجُعِلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the entire surface of Islam, the entire surface of universe, it was made clean, it was made a worshipping area for the worshippers. The Prophet says that therefore, whenever any article of faith, whenever any practice of faith find you, you just have to continue, you just have to proceed and perform it. In fact, COVID-19 has offered Muslims a great opportunity of devotion to worship. To an extent, brothers and sisters, it has been mentioned by some writers that the year 2020, it shouldn't be looked at as a negative year. In fact, some of them have named it a year of worship with ingredients of, this is a year of little commission of sins, the year of intensification of tawbah, the year of istighfar, the year of family union, the year of cleanliness and purity, among many, many other things. Therefore, this means that the impact of COVID-19, it has been very, very minimal as far as the religious practices are concerned. Now, having talked about the second mechanism, let us now look at the third one, which is the existence of a precedent. Brothers and sisters in Islam, it is not the first time that the Muslim community is facing the challenges of the likes of COVID-19. As earlier stated, in the suspension of Hajj activities during outbreaks of calamities, Islamic history has recorded several outbreaks which affected the socio-economic life of Muslims and made Muslim scholars to apply the Islamic rules of emergencies to address the challenges in the observation of Islamic practices. Now, when these outbreaks and pandemic took place, the Muslim scholars came out to see how can they address them and at the same time safeguard the Islamic practices. Let us, for instance, look at what were the rules of emergency which were put down by Umar during the 18th year of Hijrah. When the Islamic state of Medina was affected by the pandemic of smallpox, which claimed thousands of lives of Muslims, Umar, with the approval of scholars, undertook the following standard operation procedures. Number one, he effected the Prophet's guideline on quarantine. This idea of quarantine, it is not new in Islam, because when the Muslim state was affected with this kind of pandemic of the smallpox in the 18th year of Hijrah, Umar radiallahu anhu asked himself, how is he going to rescue the Ummah? Until one companion by names of Mu'adh bin Jabal recited to him the Prophet's tradition, which says that when such a pandemic, when such an outbreak befalls in any geographical setting, people who are found there, they should not get out, and then others who are outside, they should not go to that area. Therefore, it is not the first time that the Islamic circles are witnessing the guidelines on quarantine. The second standard operation procedure, which was carried out by Umar radiallahu anhu, is that during that year, because there was a lot of drought, there was a lot of effect. He postponed the collection of zakah. And not only that, but he also postponed the chopping off of the hands of the thieves as a punishment for theft. And this one was also another standard operational procedure which was conducted by Umar. Number 3, Umar also ordered for the food supply from the Islamic agriculture provinces. And all these are actually giving us a challenge, especially in the Muslim circles, in the Muslim communities where we live. Such a situation, when it takes place, what are some of the leaves that we can borrow from our predecessors? The fourth and the last is Umar radiallahu anhu. He was seen personally engaging himself in the distribution of relief items, among others. What is the conclusion? The conclusion here is, it can therefore be affirmed that as other faiths were fidgeting and scratching to get guidelines of spiritual practices during the COVID-19, alhamdulillah, Muslims were basking in the early morning sun rays, benefiting from the verdicts of their predecessors. Walillahi alhamd. Therefore, this is the way how we can look at COVID-19. The conclusion or the summary is, yes, COVID-19 has had some impact, especially on such practices which take place in a certain geographical location, such as Hijjah. But the rest of the practices, such as Swala, such as Swam, and so on, they have been going on when we are applying and when we are using the principle of the rules of Sharia, which apply in such emergent situations. As I'm winding up my presentation, what are some of the challenges that COVID-19 has brought in the religious practices? I wish to spend some good time on this. Having said that, COVID-19 has posed the following challenges to the Muslim world. Number 1, it has affected the traditional physical halakas and seminars. You know that, especially during this holy month of Ramadan, many mosques the world over have been conducting several dars, several halakas, which have been going on different topics of tafsir, of fiqh, among others. And this needed, or this called for a physical interaction between the teachers and the followers. But during this time, since we are in lockdown, this is the way how COVID-19 has affected this. It has affected our traditional physical halakas, and therefore we can no longer conduct them in our mosques and other areas where we used to converge. But alhamdulillah, at the same time, that when this traditional physical halakas have not been accessed, there has been another route. As we talk now, here we are conducting our 33rd annual Ramadan convention online. And this just confirms that necessity is the mother of innovation. We didn't know that we could also use this kind of method or this kind of approach so that we can reach out to such a wider coverage, which is beyond borders. So much as COVID-19 has affected the traditional and physical halakas and seminars, but alhamdulillah, it has also opened another channel whereby you can actually reach out to a very big masses. The second challenge is COVID-19. It has exposed the weakness of the local and national Muslim leadership for lack of an established fatwa council which can issue verdicts on emergencies in light of Sharia and the local customs. What do I mean by this? Many countries, as you know, they have fatwa committees, and therefore in a situation of emergency, such fatwa committees convene and then they discuss this kind of emergencies, and at the end they issue fatwas without forgetting the local customs and traditions. But COVID-19 has caught us, or has caught some countries unaware, especially like in Uganda, whereby you find out that you cannot find even a single fatwa council at the local mosque. You cannot even find one at the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council or other national establishments of Muslims. What is found there now, what you can call what would have been the Fatwa Council, is what you call the Majlis al-Ulama. But the Majlis al-Ulama, as you all know, it is more political than juridical. Actually, when you look at its contribution or its activities, It is more concerned about the election of the Mufti, among other things. Therefore, what does this one mean? Our reliance, especially in these communities, it has always been on individual sheikhs who come out and then they start relying on imported fatwas, on imported verdicts, thus leading to a lot of contradictions. Those of you who are in Uganda, you have already tested and witnessed the kind of contradictions that we are in now. Now there is a debate that is going on. Are we going to perform Salatul Eid in our homes or not? Some sheikhs have come out and they have said that it is okay, according to the guidelines, according to the precedent of Anas bin Malik, whereby whenever he missed Salatul Eid, he could go back to his home, gather his people, and then he lead them on Salatul Fitr. But as we are still enjoying that kind of fatwa, another section of sheikhs come out and they say that no, there shouldn't be any kind of such kind of prayers, and giving a lot of reasons. What does this mean? It simply means that COVID-19 is actually exposing our weakness as Muslims. How comes that in the whole country like Uganda, we cannot have one single fatwa council which can convene in order to discuss these issues and then make one agreed upon position which can be followed by all the Ugandan masses? So, brothers and sisters in Islam, this is one of the challenge. I wish also maybe to say that this is where you could see the importance of having what we call the state madhab. Many countries in the world, they are following a specific madhab. What is the importance of the madhab? The importance of the madhab is where you have such kind of contradictions in the scholarly opinions, the state can pick one opinion according to the madhab that state is following. It is so unfortunate that COVID-19 has found us in such kind of confusion that we cannot come up with just one situation, with just one verdict regarding these kinds of emergencies. The third challenge is COVID-19 has exposed the weakness of the Muslim society in the lack of uncoordinated moves in extending charity and relief items to the needy. Yes, alhamdulillah, some of the Muslim organizations have come out and they have distributed some relief items to the needy Muslims and non-Muslims, but in such uncoordinated manner. I wish we had such a kind of establishment that could bring together all such efforts and therefore direct them towards one direction so that we can have efficiency and we can be efficient and we can have we can register such a big success. Unfortunately, you find individual organizations, this going this side, the other going this side, and therefore having such uncoordinated moves. The fourth challenge is COVID-19 has affected the physical collection of zakah. This year, you know that it might not be easy to go to your imam and pay your zakah. And therefore, it is likely to be substituted by online collection of zakah. And you know that this is also going to pose another challenge, issues of efficiency in collection and accountability. So this is the fourth challenge that we are facing during the time of COVID-19. Maybe I could finish with the fifth one. COVID-19 has challenged some Muslim families on their ability to rely on their insider human capacity to lead religious rites at home. It is known that we have not been in position to perform our Salat Tarawih in mosques. All along, we have been relying on the imams, the local imams, the mosque imams. Now that you have been banned from going and converging into the mosque, COVID-19 has just exposed many Muslim families that in the entire family, not even the head of the family, not even the first son in the family, there is no one who can lead the Tarawih. This is a very big shame. And I feel that those ones who have been affected with such a challenge, they should wake up. How comes that in the entire family, in the entire home, you do not have any single individual who can lead you in prayers, including you, who is the family head? So I wish to end that. I wish to end at that fifth challenge so that I can also look at the conclusion and then the way forward. The conclusion is, though COVID-19 pandemic has had a negative effect on other aspects of human life, the religious practices have not been much affected. Why? Due to the three intrinsic mechanisms that I have talked about. Number one being the universal nature of Islamic law, the divine categorization of religious rights, and the availability of a precedent in Islamic law that we have been relying on in order to address the affected Islamic practices. As I am concluding, what are some of the recommendations of my presentation? Number one, there is need for the establishment of the income-generating projects for the administrators of mosques and for settling the needs of Muslim institutions. I had already mentioned that mosques here are acting as a source of income to many Muslim administrators, the imams and others. Now, if this situation continues, it means that the Muslim Ummah, the imams, among others, are going to have a very big problem. Therefore, in my recommendation, I wish to recommend that Muslim society should wake up and they work towards the establishment of income-generating projects around the mosques. Such income-generating projects, they can help the administrators and even settling the bills of the mosques, among other needs of the Muslim institutions. The second recommendation is the Muslim authorities, right from grassroots to the national level, should lay down the foundation for the establishment of a solidarity fund, which could actually be like the Baitul Mal, which might be relied on in times of emergencies to address the financial needs of the Muslim society. It does not require too much. It just requires proper management, proper administration, a good saving culture, so that each and every mosque, it has at least a solidarity fund, it has a saving fund whereby it can be resorted to in order to address such emergencies which can come and affect the Muslim practices and institutions. The third recommendation is our spiritual leaders, not ruling myself out, from grassroots level to the national level, they should be retrained and equipped with technical skills for survival after Allah or ba'd Allah during the ideal and during the emergency situations. And then the fifth is effort should be made in order to establish a vibrant national fatwa council to address the emergency situations from the Islamic perspective. It is so important that at least each and every locality, it can identify the best Muslim scholars within that locality, so that should there be any challenge, should there be any problem that calls for a discussion, they can convert, they can discuss, and then after that, they can issue a verdict, which is also accommodating the culture, the